soil composition, etc. But
well,
for me,
what you just said, everything you just said, just repeat that to the peeps.
so natural wine. I mean,
Yep.
good healthy farming and minimalism in the cellar.
That's the punchline. I'm letting our guests in. Okie dokie. We can keep chatting, but I'm going to let them in. And before I do, what's life without a teeny little burp? I have a different Chardonnay than Mike does. So we've got 2 Chardonnays floating around out there at the plum markets. One is the Santa Cruz Mountain 18, and the other one is the 18
Mendocino?
Sonoma Valley.
No, Sonoma Valley.
So just so you know, and let's see if I can, do I have an admit?
Two
here?
very, very different.
Yeah, admit
different
all.
wines.
Here we go. Yay. Hi, everybody. Hello. You know what? I have to say right up front before we start officially, for those of you who haven't met, I'm Madeline. I belong to Plum Market. I thought for sure we'd have a lot of new people on this this tasting today, and maybe younger than I am. But interestingly and coolly, I know most of the people on the guest list tonight. So
cool.
I'm happy to know that y'all find the subject as interesting as I do. We've got about 20 peeps, and we're waiting for about another 10, but I think we should just start after I take a little sip of wine. Fair enough, and you can do the same.
You did mute. We have some really fancy glassware. I don't know if you can tell. This is what's in our Airbnb today. So
Nice.
I did attempt to polish this. It was futile. It was futile.
I'm just gonna go with it.
So hopefully that doesn't affect the situation at all. But
you know what? I think my money's on the wine. Wine and our intent and our open heart can overcome every damn thing.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. So
we actually had plastic cups today. So at wineries. So I feel like we're gonna be all right.
It's a step up.
So Mike and Carrie, who are chatting with us, Mike is the wine team leader at Ann Arbor West, and Carrie is his beautiful and very wine conversant spouse. And they are in northern Michigan and schlepped the 2 Dressner wines and the 2 Vinca Minors with them, and they've been tasting Michigan wine all day today.
Cool.
So I've got to keep an eye on the waiting room. That's my little job. But I think we should just jump into the deep end of the pool, don't you? And start talking about this very cool, rather confusing subject. I'm giving Mike Pfeiffer the credit for pushing this idea through as a virtual tasting. I actually was looking forward to it because I am still, but was even more confused by the subject because it seems that other than the fact that we all love the idea of natural and we all love Mother Nature, it is not something that is, it is something that is defined in wine terms by an individual producer. By the way, hello, Robin. I neglected to put the wine names in the chat room, but I can tell everyone there are 4, and I'm just going to name them quickly. The way that we're going to taste them, if you have all 4, we're going to do the Macon first, the French Chardonnay, the Macon-Charnay, and then we're going to do the Vinca Minor Chardonnay. So the 2 whites, Macon-Charnay and Vinca Minor Chardonnay. And then we're going to do the Chinon, the French red first, and we're going to finish with the Vinca Minor Carignan. So Chinon and Carignan. So going 1 through 4, 1 is Macon-Charnay, 2 is Vinca Minor Chardonnay, 3 is Chinon, and 4 is Vinca Minor Carignan. Let me see if there's anybody else waiting. I don't think so, but my team has been trying to teach me to be adept at Zoom, and they're going to fail, but as long as we don't shut down, I figure this is a good thing. So cheers, everyone. We have just a couple of things. I want to set the stage for tonight because this is a really neat, unusual tasting. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. Oh, I'm going to show you before I do anything else how deeply we feel at Plum about this subject. Because after really weeks of arguments, not discussions, arguments, look what we debuted at our Chicago store. This is an end cap, sustainably farmed, low intervention. You can't see them now, but the individual signs will actually have a green circle if they are organic or biodynamic. And then at the top of each sign, we're going to try to put anything that the winemaker wants to say about how they define natural. So we're not kidding when we know this is here, when we say we know this is here to stay. And the interest in the subject is on a vertical climb. I mean, so how do we all define natural? You know, the short version to me is no additives, no manipulation, possibly, probably organic, possibly, probably no sulfur addition. But once you start scratching the surface, as I said, it's really producer specific. You know, the buzzwords that we're all hearing. And by the way, you go to Meijer or Kroger, those are grocery stores, Jason, in Metro Detroit in Michigan, and they have significant organic produce sections. So, you know, the common man, capital C, capital M, every man, you know, has a thirst for organic and it's here to stay. But we hear organic, biodynamic, sustainable, low intervention. And, you know, sometimes individually, sometimes lumped together. But I thought at least tonight what we would do is, if not clarify, put a spotlight on this subject and undoubtedly end up with more questions than we started with. Fair enough? So this is kind of an exciting exploration. People like me, especially me and my colleagues who, you know, have been trained classically and have a credential, can be, I'm not going to say snobby about it, but I've had to really put a rein on my mind. And if I perceive something that classically I've been trained to perceive as a flaw, just to tell myself to get over it and try to perceive the wine as it's being presented in the glass, especially if I admire and respect the producer it came from. So we're exploring this subject through two very different sources. Dressner selections, we've got a friend here tonight. Josefa, can you wave? Where are you? There you are. Josefa Concanon has been working with Dressner for 10 years. And prior to that, worked for, I think, one of the best fine wine distributors in the Chicago area, Maverick. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a stint with an Oregon supplier just because I wanted to work for Joe. And he said I didn't have any experience in the national market. So
you got it. Good. And I called her, was it yesterday or the day before? I gave her no time to do this, but she was kind enough to jump on because otherwise I'd be the ambassador for Dressner, and I thought that was a little silly. And, you know, you say Louis Dressner, and it's truly an iconic name that was considered the, you know, the standard for natural wine before they didn't even use that term in their original credo, but Josefa will talk about that. And to this day, even the young hipsters know Dressner, God love them. And then we also have from California, there you are. Are you sitting in your tasting room or your winery, Jason?
Yeah, sitting in the winery. I'm still here. We still have a lot of work to do.
Oh, can you believe this? This is a guy who's just finishing harvest and has a ton of work to do, and he's spending an hour with us. God love you. And we have, he's the owner winemaker at Vinca Minor, based in Berkeley, and sourcing grapes from throughout California. And we have Mike Francisco to thank for your being here, who was on earlier, and I don't know what happened to him. I don't.
Oh, Mike's great.
So Mike is joining us from our another terrific small fine wine distributor in Michigan, AHD Vintners, and I know we've got a couple other AHD Vintners people on. So you're going to hear Mike Pfeiffer, our wine team leader, Jason from Vinca Minor, Josefa from Dressner, and maybe even Mike Francisco if he reappears. Keep the chat room flowing. Mike Pfeiffer, will you keep an eye on it? And so will I.
Yep.
We've got Marshall. God love you. Marshall is our professor. When Rod Johnson isn't here, Marshall reads more about wine than anybody on the planet other than, Jancis Robinson, who compiled the Oxford Companion. He just defined it for you from organic grapes, no additives, wild yeast, little or no sulfur, no filter fining. And we'll see if there's agreement there as we taste along. Put plenty of questions in the chat room. I'll try to keep an eye on them and answer them as we go along. One little bit of difference, and I actually didn't tell Jason and Josefa yet. What I'd really like to do before we talk about the wines, each one, is taste them and describe them. Because this is a subject where I don't want to have a lot of stuff floating around in my head. The older I get, the more I like to approach wine innocently. And I thought it'd be neat if we taste, maybe what we'll do is we'll taste the two Chardonnays side by side and then talk about the Macon-Charnay. Fair enough? If you don't mind doing that. So everybody with me? Are we good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that rather lengthy intro, but I'm setting the stage selfishly for this exploration. So the first wine we're tasting is the French Chardonnay, Macon-Charnay, and actually what I'll do is I'll pull up the label so we can look at it, but that's all that I will do. Hold on. And so there we go. This is the first wine we're tasting. It's from the Mâconnais. Chardonnay is what? The commune or township in the Mâconnais. Jean Manciat is the producer. And you'll notice right on here, he says viticulture. So he is proud to claim himself as a grower right up front. And this is 100% Chardonnay. So also this producer, well, I'm not going to say it. See, Madeline? Do as I say, not as I do. So if anyone else has the wine and wants to opine, Mike, I know you've got it, but I'm going to quickly describe what I'm perceiving. This to me,
Don't let Carrie do it.
what's that? Carrie's very poetic. So give me one chance here, Carrie. I'm going to do the brown bird version of this.
There we go.
But it smells to me like just textbook Chardonnay. And that's what I mean by that is just like a room full of golden apples that were just cut open. Sometimes, Chardonnay smells more like green apples or different kinds of apples, but also pears. It just has a really lush, dry, fruity smell that's apples and pears. Jason, you know what I should have done? Damn it. I should have sent the two Dressner wines. Massive character flaw. So we're going to send you some Michigan wines.
Yes.
We are.
Yes.
I would love that.
Cool. And Josefa, I should have sent you the Vinca Minor wine. See? That's laid plans. You do your level best and then you fail cheerfully. March on.
Yeah, you said they weren't in Illinois, so I couldn't have even gone and found them anywhere here.
They are, but there was discrepancy in terms of what we could get and if it would be the same as Michigan. So it was just a square peg round hole. But anyway, to me, this Chardonnay is, I don't perceive any oak. It manages to be round and lush, and it finishes nicely tart, but just nice, classic, probably unoaked Chardonnay. And we always talk about minerality. A little of that's in there too. Would you agree with that short assessment, Carrie? You want to add anything to that?
I agree. Now, there's one caveat. I'm not sure if the calcification on this fancy glass is issues with the minerality that I'm actually picking up, but I am getting definitely that chalky, dusty, like there's definitely something there. I mean, I don't want to say limestone, obviously, but it has that kind of really dusty, chalky feel to it. I agree with the fruit assessment. I think it's very fresh though. I mean, I definitely get the dried yellow apple, but I'm getting a lot of fresh yellow apple, bright, youthfulness in this wine, which is really, really pretty. I mean, not too young, obviously, but The complexity is great. I think that it's lovely that the fruit is there, but it's not solely dominant. It's a very balanced wine, and I do love the fact that when we're talking about natural wine, it doesn't taste like apple cider vinegar to me. So that's a delightful bonus, right?
And no, nicely done. I knew that you would pretty up my simple comments. Jason, how do you feel? Do you mind if we go right ahead and taste your Chardonnay right side by side with it? Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah.
And everyone, we are not, this is apples to alien apples. We are not actually looking for good, better, best. We're simply accepting both these wines as being made by credible, lovely producers. And Josefa, I don't know if you have the wine in front of you, do you?
I don't, but
you've had it, right?
I've had it many times, yes.
You want to comment on the Macon before we move on to the Vinca Minor Chard?
Sure. Just, the Macon is an area that is really dominated by the big co-ops.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jean Manciat took over from his father back in the early 80s, he immediately parted ways with the co-op and started making wine on his own. He did some extensive replanting, but he tried to use as much material as he could from the old vines. This estate historically is very important to us because it was probably one of the first estates we started importing into the United States back in 1989, I want to say. So we've been with Jean Manciat for a very long time. He's very, very close to Denise's home in the Macon. And you were kind of spot on with the limestone. The soils are clay and limestone, and the vines are about 35 years old. So that tends to give the Chardonnay some really nice structure.
Well, Carrie gets the credit for the limestone. Did you like the apple pear and the roundness? Does that ring true to you?
Sure.
Wonderful. And hold the thought, because we're going to show lots of pictures of the Manciat property. But I'm picking up Jason's Chardonnay, which, I have to tell you, may I pay you just a lovely compliment? You've been very careful about oxygen on this wine, and it smells like a fine white Burgundy to me, where the people have been very careful not to rack too much. I love it.
Yeah, I only rack once, and that's just prior to bottling.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a wine that sees, close to a year in kind of a combination of stainless steel and just neutral French oak.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to like putting the wine on pretty heavy lees in stainless steel and kind of managing almost no oxygen, just try to pick up as much reduction as possible, and then using
Can you
kind of a
define
combination
that?
of
I'm interrupting just so people know what we're
Yeah.
talking about. Racking means when you move the wine from one container to another, and reduction is the opposite of oxidation. So,
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing, it's an is thing. Is that fair enough? So that's why I said it smelled a little reductive in a good way. It just told me you were being very careful about how much exposure to oxygen. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's kind of a fine line of just, I like aging the wine on pretty heavy lees for its entire, life cycle prior to bottling. Just, it allows you to use less sulfur during the aging process, or none at all. Just because the lees, it's protecting it. There's some good CO2 there. So that's really important for me. But with Chardonnay, I do love kind of those flinty characteristics that lend itself well to minerality. So this is the wine that really shows it off well. There's some other Chardonnays that I work with that tend to be a little bit more weights, more texture, more generous fruits, where this kind of walks a really fine line. It's cool climate. It's 3 miles in from the Pacific Ocean. So
No, wait a minute. Remember, we have two Chardonnays. This is truth. This is Madeline making another boo-boo. So in my glass, I've got 2018 Santa Cruz Mountain Chardonnay. So look at your back label if you've got the Chardonnay. And Mike, you've got Sonoma Valley, correct?
Yeah, Thornton Clark Vineyard.
Okay, yeah. So completely opposite site than Santa Cruz. This is a little higher elevation and just kind of this sun-kissed site. So there's, we get plenty of sunshine, and there's definitely more fruit characteristics here. And this sees, it's 100% just neutral French oak. There's no stirring of the lees, but this wine always has just really beautiful texture to it. Age for, I age for about 9 to 12 months prior to bottling.
And everyone, if you look at these side by side, actually, it's very neat to see the two. I've got an 18 French, the Macon, and the 18 Santa Cruz Chardonnay. And Jason's Chardonnay is a little bit darker in color because it has spent a longer time in barrel. Wouldn't you say, Jason? That's the reason. And this is not a thumbprint of anything wrong. It just is, and it's another reason to pay attention to color. So the treatment on both the Santa Cruz Chardonnay or the Sonoma Valley are the same, regardless of which one they have?
No, a little different. So Sonoma Valley is 100% just older French oak, but on relatively heavy lees. And then the Santa Cruz Mountain, about half of it goes into stainless steel, and then the balance goes into also neutral French oak. And then I combine them prior to bottling.
Hey, Jason, how big is the Thornton Clark vineyard?
It is very tiny. It's less than an acre, and it's basically vines planted on rock. So there's very little nutrients. Our yields are incredibly low. So typically from an acre vineyard that's healthy, it's normal to produce about 3 tons of fruits, or maybe a couple hundred cases. So from this 1 acre, we barely get 2 barrels, and we end up with about 87 cases annually. So incredibly stressed out vines. We get this beautiful intensity, but the yields are incredibly low.
So the slope on it, I've seen a picture, I think, of your daughter actually on
Yeah.
the vineyard. It's relatively steep, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
It's west facing, incredibly steep. Gets all that afternoon beautiful sunshine. But it's an incredible site. I mean, I think most farmers, most owners would just rip this out in a heartbeat because financially doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
But this is a really small vineyard for this one grower that happens to, have maybe hundreds of acres of, or not hundreds, but he has a larger Zinfandel vineyard. And this is, he loves the fruit from this particular site. And we both know it's incredibly special to keep it there.
Now, before we show the pictures, I'm wondering if anyone wants to, anyone who's had enough wine moving in their nervous system and is not feeling too shy, would like to comment on either or both Chardonnays. This is a safe, cheerful zone, and I'm sure either Josefa or Jason would be happy to hear what you have to say. Anyone want to chime in? Just unmute yourself. I think you have the capacity to do that. Yes.
I'm seeing Michelle. Hi, Michelle. I'm seeing Michelle's comment on the chat. What size are the neutral barrels? I'm assuming she's referring to your Chardonnay and not our Chardonnay. Because we have the Santa Cruz versus the Sonoma.
I'm curious if it's a barrique or if it's a foudre.
Barrique. So there. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Jason.
Nice to see you. So just really standard. It's 225 liter, just classic French barrique. But they're older. They're, for me, neutral is after about 4 uses. So they just become these really great vessels and take a little oxygen, really kind of round out a wine without imparting any sort of oak characteristics.
Well, people who have too much money and like to buy new barrels would call it neutral after probably 1 or 2 uses, but there you have it. Anybody want to talk about how they like these 2 wines or what they perceive?
Madeline and Jason, Fritz here.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. Jason, question for you. I pick up a bit of effervescence. Is that unusual?
No, not at all. I really don't. So I think that lends itself to, I racked once prior to bottling. We don't fine or filter, and our SO2, our sulfur use is incredibly low. It's probably about 10 parts. So usually when you pull a cork on a bottle, specifically this Chardonnay showed a slight effervescence. There's just a little CO2 releasing. You could quickly give that a quick decant, even swirl the glass, and that's gonna dissipate.
No,
Thank
you weren't. You weren't. Thank you very much for piping up there, because someone else had managed it in the chat room, and I said it's just fine. Yes, it's in there, and it's undoubtedly intentional. It wasn't like Jason wasn't paying attention. Any comments on the Macon-Charnay? I think it's just really nice, classic Chard. How do you find it, Mike?
No, it's, you know, you and I, we all, when we decided on the wines for this tasting, we decided 2 old world, 2 new world to go forward with. And I think that the Chinon too, it's a, for many people, it might be a surprising revelation that natural wine can be also classic. And I think this is just a classic Macon that just happens to be made naturally, whatever naturally means in, you know, in the world of wine. But it's a classically made Macon that you, and we'll talk about it later, but I think, you know, if you didn't put a natural wine sign on it, nobody would know the difference. And I think that's ultimately where the quote unquote natural wine world is going. Jason's wines, if you look at Jason's website, if you look at Jason's labels, they don't say natural wine anywhere on them. It's just a way that producers are making wines. And there are a lot of classic producers that make wine quote unquote naturally. And they've always made it that way. You know, the issue of natural wine, it's kind of the popular thing. It's kind of the here and now. And in Plum, I have a natural wine section. And I know West Bloomfield has a natural wine section.
And tomorrow you're going to ask for that nice big sign that
tomorrow I'm going to ask for that nice sign that Chicago got that I didn't get.
Rude.
But eventually that's going to go away. And I just, you know, the purpose of doing the tasting and the discussion today was just to kind of demystify all of this. And I think all of these wines, you know, show that, you know, just because it's natural, there are funky wines out there that are natural. I get that. And I enjoy them. Many people don't, but there are a lot of really quality made natural, quote unquote, natural wines that are just quality wines, and you don't have to necessarily deem them natural. So I think all 4 of these wines are the 2 old worlds are classic in style. Jason's wines are, I think, a little more representative of what people might think natural wines are. And Jason, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they're a little more, there is some effervescence. There is a lift to them. And I think, and I'm not a winemaker, but I think part of that comes from the way the wine's made with CO2. But they're beautifully made wines that we're trying not to scare people away from natural wine. We're just trying to kind of clarify, if you will, what natural wine.
What that word means. And hold the thought about sulfites and sulfur, because it's really important. We'll
be like 15 minutes on that.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna flip through Josefa. I'm gonna show a little some pictures on the Macon. Of course, here we are in France. Here we are. Here's Burgundy proper. And here's the Côte Chalonnaise, and then here is the Maconnais. And within that, I just love seeing, there's Macon-Charnay. I love seeing the words that are on the label on maps. And here's Jean Manciat. Well, I'm flipping through this. Anything that occurs to you, Josefa, in terms of this gentleman, or what, you know, how Dressner defines their naturality, or, you know, what their original credo, and if they've amended that at all, would be great.
Well, we haven't changed it that much. And you know, when we were talking earlier, when we first came on, Jason kind of mentioned what you and I talked about yesterday. And for us, it always begins in the vineyard. It's the farming that's the most important thing, because without good farming, you're not going to get these clean, healthy fermentations that allow you to minimize sulfur use.
And this is all hand harvested, correct?
Everything is hand harvested.
Everything
is hand harvested. We hand harvesting and native yeast fermentations are kind of what define how we define natural wine. because like I said, you can't get good, clean fermentations to mitigate sulfur use unless you've harvested by hand. If you're machine harvesting, you're going to have to dump a bunch of sulfur into the picking bins because the grapes are going to start oxidizing if you don't. So it's there where I think the process of defining natural wine should begin. And
I wanted everyone to see this shot because, you know, we think of white wine, white grapes, but the juice is really sort of muddy green as it comes off off the press. And I have to ask you, forgive me for interrupting you. He is using barrel on some of his cuvées, but not on the one that we're
not on the one you're, not on the one that you have.
What is this? Neither Mike Pfeiffer nor I could define this. Do you know what this picture is?
I think it's just a shot from the top into one of the vats.
Oh, very cool. You're right.
Yeah.
Like yeast.
Looks like yeast.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I was sure I was utterly wrong, but it was beautiful. So I put it up there. Some more. It says, this must be what, winter, spring from the looks of it.
Yeah. And that looks like it's after the pruning.
And this, I wanted to show this one because he's into short canes, correct?
Yes.
Which they do in Burgundy as well.
Yes.
So you talked about wild yeast and, this gentleman bought his, he left the co-op as soon as his father died. Is that correct?
Yes. He left the co-op. It's one of those things that, your family's been doing this forever. And he was really adamant about wanting to leave because the co-ops were really kind of taking over in the Macon. And he just took so much pride in his work, and he realized that there was a market if he could just go off on his own. And that's the story with several of our producers who've left, who started out as part of a co-op and then have left. And this is kind of part of how the natural wine movement evolved in France. And it was, you see what the changes that took place in the Beaujolais in particular with beginning with Marcel Lapierre.
Right.
And leaving this monolith of wine production and wanting to go out on your own.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but just from a yield perspective, because that's something that I believe your company looks for, producers with naturally or intentionally low yields. When I was reading about Manciat, we're talking 50 hectoliters per hectare, which is about half of what a co-op would produce. Right. And that's significant. And I found this neat. I'm going to go back to the credo for a moment, if you don't mind, because there's the pluses, but the minuses. We aren't big fans of wines that are over acidified, over harvested, over filtered, over oaked, over extracted. And you also, this was cool in the original one. You guys are big proponents of wines that are great fun. And I thought, how cool, at least, sense of humor, right?
Well, Joe had a very distinct sense of humor. I don't know if anybody remembers Joe at all, but this was written at the height of the Parker era. And so where Parker was espousing wines with gobs of fruit and high alcohols, we were doing exactly the opposite. And I remember my early days of Maverick back in like 2002 and 2003, working in a car with Joe all day. And, the first thing we would be met with from a retailer was, well, what did Parker give this wine?
And that had to be immensely frustrating. Now, we heard just today, Jason, I'm going to transition to looking at a few shots from Vinca Minor, but we were talking about Louis Dressner, and you said you guys are friends, yes? Oops, did I lose you? I think you're muted. Hold on just a sec. Let me see. I can unmute you.
There you go.
Unmute. There we go.
Okay.
And you said it with a big smile on your face.
No, I love him. We always have a great time. I met him years ago in New York. Just probably I was on a sales trip, and we have mutual friends. I'm actually from, I don't know, I know Michelle knows this, but I was born and raised in Michigan.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
Very cool. Where in Michigan?
I grew up in Lapeer, Michigan. And so Jules and I both have a mutual friend that I grew up with in Ann Arbor. And so we were connected, you know, years ago through our friend Sam. And
well, no
yeah.
degrees of separation, and welcome home. And to put this, clarify, Jules is Joe's son, is that correct?
Yes.
And this is the Chardonnay I'm having. And some people are having the Sonoma Valley Chardonnay. So if you don't mind, here's San Pablo Bay in San Francisco. So the Sonoma Valley Chardonnay is coming from, am I in the right area here? Come on. Here we go. Sonoma.
So
Valley.
it's southeast of Santa Rosa, and then just go down to
here we go.
the town of Napa or Sonoma. I'm sorry.
Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Right.
And it would just be a little northeast in that little pocket there. That's called. It's just right there between the town of Sonoma and Moon Mountain.
And then on the other side, we have San Francisco here. And here we are in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And you didn't talk about the grower from here. Is this someone you've known?
Yeah, it's a really tiny vineyard. You know, it's also probably a 2-acre vineyard in Scotts Valley, which is 3 miles in from the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
And it's basically, it's one of the last vineyards that we pick every year. It barely gets ripe. You know, the fog rolls in around 3:30 in the afternoon. It doesn't burn off to the following day, close to 11:30. You know, so
is it up here? Is it closer to? Is it? Where is it? Like somewhere here?
Okay, so Santa Cruz Mountains. So Ben Lomond Mountain.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, you're getting. It's just a little northeast of the actual town of Santa Cruz.
Okay, so like here. Got it.
A little further down, but it's but yeah, it's right there. So it's just covered in fog and incredibly cool climate. I mean, most growing days, you know, I might be up in Sonoma or Mendocino, and you know, in August, and it's 95 degrees, and I'll take a drive down to Scotts Valley to go take a quick grape sample to see where the Chardonnay's at, and it's 57 degrees. Middle summer.
This is whatever you call not a diurnal swing, but a swing from place to place. Tell us who these beautiful women are.
Oh, that's my wife Emily, and then that's our daughter Ava, who is she's amazing.
And your wife Emily has a significant administrative job at eBay. Is that correct? So you've got a person who can manage things.
Yeah, she's been there for a while. She's kind of just kind of cranking away and heading up brands for them, and she's pretty amazing woman.
Is your tasting room closed in Berkeley now, or have you opened it?
You know, the city has August 1st. They've allowed us to open up sidewalk seating, which has been amazing, and then indoor dining has opened up just recently in the town of Berkeley for restaurants, but we have yet to have been given the green light to open up our tasting rooms, so indoors. So, you know, we're probably a couple of weeks out, and we should be open for indoor.
Well, God love you. You know, what you guys have been going through in California, I don't know if the fires have affected you or not, but the combination of that and the lockdowns, are more challenges than someone as cheerful as you should have to.
Yeah, we didn't actually make any red wine this year.
Wow.
But that's why we are now making cider. So
before we can you touch on that lightly, and is there anything else about the natural winemaking about your Chardonnay before we move away to the reds? Michigan is a big cider state. You know,
absolutely.
We do apples very well here. So you're making cider because of the fires?
You know, it was just kind of a creative thing. You know, we knew right away that, you know, there was most of the vineyards were the reds, you know, were very far out from being even close to being picked. And there was, you know, we had already seen about a month of smoke and fire, and it was only getting worse. So, you know, I basically knew that we weren't making red wine. And then I have some friends out in West County, Sonoma, that are winemakers, but are also have been in the cider industry, the natural cider world for a very long time. And, you know, they had already picked most of those orchards and sitting in cold storage. So next, you know, I was kind of crushing and juicing a bunch of really beautiful heirloom apples from orchards that date back to the mid 1800s out in Sebastopol. And we started bringing in some really beautiful cider. And so I have a bunch of barrels, bunch of like just cider fermenting in barrels right now. That's I'll probably release
that's your mission. That was your Michigan roots moving in your heart.
Yeah.
Before we pick up our first red glass, I would ask you a favor. Right before we invited everyone in to the tasting, you gave us a 60-second snapshot of what natural winemaking means to you personally. Do you mind repeating any version of that? That would be great.
Yeah. You know, for us, you know, I've been making natural wine with Vinca Minor and started Vinca Minor in 2013. And since 2013, since day one, it's been the same, working with growers that are passionate about clean farming, which, you know, you don't have to be certified, but no chemicals being used in the vineyard. And most of the vineyards we work with are not only organic, but they're dry farmed and they're old vines. So we're working, most of the vineyards are, you know, especially the Carignan that's coming up. These are vineyards that are, you know, almost 100 years old up in Mendocino. And that's very important for us. So it starts in the vineyard, and then in the cellar, it means natural fermentations, native yeast, no additions at all. For us, it just means a tiny bit of sulfur prior to bottling.
For stability?
I think for me, sulfur really brings into focus a lot of really beautiful nuances of a wine if you want to start talking about terroir. And that's not always the case. I noticed some barrels that are just so bright, so focused without sulfur. And then there are some wines that really just kind of bring into focus. And it might even just be 5 to 10 parts. Now, mind you, an industrial wine might have hundreds and hundreds of parts of sulfur in it.
So we're talking barely trace. And this is actually good for us to hear. You know, this isn't light on, light off. And it's
5 to 10 parts. And that little, you know, addition might bring out these little nuances that might have been somewhat blurred before, at least for me tasting barrel to barrel. So, you know, that's a decision that I made prior.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I am going to push us along to taste the reds. Just so, well, first of all, you can get back to work at some point in time. And I don't want to lose everyone at 7:30. So forgive me for interrupting you. So I think we're going to taste these individually. So Josefa, I'm going to pick up the Chinon and talk about it for a moment. I don't know how many of you have wine number 3. That is the Bernard Baudry Chinon. So we're talking Cabernet Franc from the middle of the Loire Valley. And Mike and I tasted this a couple of weeks ago. And first of all, if you look at it, it's opaque. If you move the glass, it stains it. If you look at the very rim, it's purple, which to me indicates an enthusiastically young red from a thick-skinned grape variety. And I love the fragrance. It's, you know, I can't help but being slightly classic here because, you know, as someone who has shepherded people through blind tastings, I want to tell any candidates out there, memorize this. This is Cabernet Franc, however you want to define it. And Cabernet Franc has a really exuberant aromatic that you can define on your own. But to me, it's always a combination of you know, red and dark berry fruit, and also a beautiful green element, not like green pepper, not pyrazine. It's more just like herbs or fresh herbs, both dried and fresh. And on the palate, there's a richness to this wine. It's lush. And surprisingly, you know, it's got really nice acid lift, and the tannins are drying, but very well mannered. But I just get this impression of, frankly, Jason mentioned it, old vines, which do what? Naturally lower yields, and you get a concentration that you wouldn't have from, you know, more enthusiastically harvested young vines. But this is plush and dense, and I don't perceive any oak on this wine. So if they're using any new oak on it, you know, it's utterly integrated. Carrie, are you ready with your poetic descriptions?
I am, but what's interesting is that the one thing I really noticed about this wine is the balance, right? I think it's really, really, every single component is super well integrated. Everything is perfectly in place where it should be. When I first tasted this wine, what was interesting was, you know, again, we're talking about the pyrazine qualities, again, not super bell pepper. It was definitely more of like that egg cucumber skin, like just something a little bit more muted, darker fruit spectrum. I got some great cranberry tones.
Ooh, cranberry, good one. Tart fruit.
Yeah, there's a little bit of tart fruit. It's, you know, it's interesting because the fruit spectrum does seem to be a little bit more dried and a little bit more, it's not cooked in any way, but there's a freshness, but there's also this kind of muted thing that it's doing, whereas if you taste it side by side with the Vinca Minor jumps out at you, right? I mean, it's definitely a younger, brighter, bigger style, which is beautiful. I mean, the Vinca Minor is also fantastic.
Carignan versus Franc, but no, they're very different wines, and this is why I wanted us to taste these individually. I want to remind us of where we are, because, you know, there's always a sense of lovely place. Here's the Loire Valley, and there is the Touraine. And le voilà, there is Chinon. So we're talking about, you know, Cab Franc land, and here's Sauvignon Blanc land, and here is Chenin Blanc land, and there is Muscadet land. And boy, these vineyards are gorgeous. You have been to this site, Josefa? Have you been to Baudry?
Oh, many times. Yes.
Lucky you. I just thought this was a killer shot. I picked it up from the website, I think. And this is the father and son, right?
And those two humans are incredible joys to be around. So, yeah. Mathieu Baudry and his father, Bernard. Mathieu has pretty much taken over. Bernard is retired, but he never really retires. I mean, last time we were there, he was out pruning vines with us. So
well, you got to do something, correct?
Exactly.
Beautiful home.
Their estate is, and the vines are located almost right on the Vienne River.
Tell us about this cellar. Is this?
Oh, it's a beautiful old troglodyte cave. It's a beautiful old limestone
moly.
cellar. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Wow. And this is open. Oh, this is as they enter.
This is the entrance to the cellar. Yeah. It's carved into the hill.
And so what is, he is certified organic, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, they are certified. The thing that's interesting to note about the Baudry estate is most of the cuvées are very site specific. The cuvée that you're drinking, the Domaine, is the only one that blends grapes from two very distinct sites. So the Lagrange is the one that's closest to the river at the bottom of the hill. And the soil here is very alluvial. And then as you move up the slope to the Grezot vineyard, you get a lot more clay and limestone. And then at the very top of the hill, you get the very dense limestone.
I wanted everyone to see this because people talk about composting. These folks are using their own compost, which is, are we talking from both plant matter, but also grape skins and such? Is that what their compost is?
Their compost would be all plant matter because they don't have any livestock or any animals.
And you know, the other thing that was interesting, and I know I'm interrupting you, but this is exciting to me because some people will say, well, why do they compost if they want lower yields? But he feels that he needs the soil is so poor that he needs to encourage a little bit more yield because he doesn't want harsh tannins. Did I get that right?
Yes, and it's putting nutrients back in the soil.
And here you are, you were talking limestone at the top, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then, so we have the top, the middle, and then we have what, clay down here?
Clay and limestone, and then at the bottom of the hill, it's mostly pebbly alluvial soils.
And this was very cool. This little terroir display.
It's always very, whenever we have groups there, it's always one of the most photographed things in the tasting room. But one of the things to note, somebody mentioned that they didn't taste any oak in the wine. This cuvee and the Grange cuvee are aged in concrete vat. All of the fermentations are now done in concrete vat, and the Domaine cuvee and Grange are aged in concrete. Anything above that level is going into big barrels.
I still have a job. Good. Yay. You know.
Great call, Madeline. Great call.
But you know what? I've tasted things and said things, and then the wine is revealed to me, and I go, I'm looking at the label, and I don't believe you. You know. So you perceive what you perceive, and a lot of it is, you know, just that perception. But the punchline for me is, it's not an issue of what they've done with it. It's just the quality of food is so good, and there's nothing missing in this wine. So they are particular about low sulfur use, correct? Somebody needs to mute, I think. We talked about low yields and, you know, homemade compost.
My mom's coming over for dinner tonight, so I'm gonna miss the last part of the presentation. So if anybody has any last minute questions, I can answer. Otherwise, I'm gonna say goodbye and thank you very much.
Oh, and we can always, you know what, I can email them to you. You know, because I always send a follow-up email with my email address visible. So if you have any more questions for Josefa, you were very kind considering mom's coming over to spend as much time with us as you did. Thank you for being a terrific Midwest ambassador for Dressner. And now everyone, before Josefa goes, what are you going to do? You're going to flip. Remember, I feel like a harpy saying this. Flip the label around. The importer label is hugely important.
Yeah, it's you know, it gets back to the idea of, you know, what defines natural wine. Well, there isn't really a definition per se, but if you get to know like winemakers like Jason, or if you get to know importers, then you can kind of know that they're sticking to a particular philosophy of winemaking and grape growing, things like that.
Well, the Greek here gives you a big actual hug over the phone. Thank you for being so responsive and great ambassador. And I know everyone joins me in saying that. Have a wonderful dinner. What are you cooking?
I've been, during the pandemic, I've been working on perfecting my Chicago deep dish pizza. So,
oh my God.
And my mom misses it, so I said it.
We are actively jealous. Yay.
Jason, I'll tell Jules I saw you. I ran into you on the interwebs.
Thank you, Josefa. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Really appreciate it. So we're going to taste some Carignan now, but before we do that, did anyone else have the Chinon and wants to opine about how it's showing? You know, I'm simply.
I already spoke.
Oh, she already spoke. Everyone
is absolutely fantastic.
Restrained and elegant. If you have it, oh, Michelle's playing with her doggie. Is this one Ferris or Sheba? Ferris.
I got home right before the tasting started, so they're feeling a little needy.
Needy, yes, good. Well, you can keep her
Sorry.
on the lap. If you haven't had Cabernet Franc or you're curious about Loire Franc, this is a good place to start, and it's a good price-value relationship too, and it'll be in all the stores for a little while. So let's go on to Jason's Carignan. Yay! And this is a very interesting grape variety, and I can't wait to hear you motor mouth about it, because I'm looking at it. It's certainly not as concentrated as the Franc, but it's staining the glass as well. I can't see through it, and it's got a pretty rosy red color on the rim. And mine is 2017 Mendocino, old vine and dry farmed. And one of the things after I shut up, if you could address right away, is the whole business of why are old vines important and what is dry farmed? So when I smell this, I love this smell. This smells rustic in the best possible way. And that I swear to God, it smells like garrigue, Jason. You know, it just smells like underbrush and dried herbs and blackberries on the vine. Like Michelle used to say, it's with some Zinfandels, like you took the bush and just shoved it in the bottle. And nothing dirty about it at all, just very much of the earth, you know, very terroir driven. And on the palate, It's got scratchy tannins, but you can taste through it. It's juicy, mouth drying and crisp all at the same time. It's begging for, this is the vegetarian talking, it's begging for some meat. And another thing I'm curious is your favorite food to eat with this puppy, you know? So please go ahead and tell us about this wine, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think old vine for me is really important, specifically in California, where I work in Northern California. You know, Carignan kind of showed up here in the late 1800s. And this was definitely kind of a workhorse varietal for a lot of farmers because it just put out such a big yield in its you know, in its youth. But most farmers say that Carignan really doesn't become interesting until it's about 65, 70 years old.
Holy moly, that's a long time to wait.
It is a long time to wait, but I think we're really lucky because there's still quite a bit of old vine Carignan vines up in Mendocino that are around 70, 80, 90, some pushing 100 years old, that are just scattered around, and they're absolutely thriving.
Were they originally planted because they when they're young, they yield, you know, with enthusiasm, correct?
Correct. And, you know, it was just, you know, the grape Carignan, when it's young, it gives you some really powerful tannins. It gives you a great acidity, some really good color. So for winemakers, this was a great tool for blending. And believe it or not, the farmer that I work with, we were taking a look at some of his father's paperwork, his logs back in the 50s and 60s, trying to figure out who was buying Carignan back in the 50s and 60s. And there was quite a bit of Carignan getting shipped down to Napa Valley. And
oh, and blended?
Blended into the Cabernet when you needed some more acidity or some more tannins.
And when did this happen? I missed the time frame you mentioned.
The 60s or so.
Well, note to self, you know, they ameliorated their Cabernet. We are in, where are we? We're in Mendocino, correct? Yes.
Yeah, so let's take a look. So we are, so if you go over east from the coast, this is, if you look to Redwood Valley,
yep.
That is where this vineyard is.
Have you known this grower for a while?
Since 2013, we've been working together, and Redwood Valley is definitely, so from Ukiah north to Redwood Valley is nothing but old vine, Zinfandel, Carignan, Petit Syrah, Chenin Blanc, but Redwood Valley is kind of, you know, the spiritual home for a lot of really incredible old vine vineyards.
Now, I read this today, and so please correct me if I'm, you know, I've got misinformation floating in my head. But for organic farming, actually Mendocino is ideal, especially Redwood Valley, because it's inland and you don't have humidity issues, correct?
That's correct. So it's very much kind of like the Languedoc or the south of France. It's hot, it's arid, it's rugged. You can get away with, there's just no mildew pressure. So you can get away with really no sprays at all, just good canopy management, a little bit of disking, a little bit of tilling.
What's disking?
You know, just taking the tractor through and just kind of getting kind of like reworking the earth. And, you know, for a lot of these dry farm vineyards, dry farm meaning there's no water source. You're only relying on whatever rain you get in the wintertime. But it works.
But you're telling everybody about that. So why are you letting us know this? What does it do to the wine?
You know, dry farm vineyards, you know, they have a really deep root system. So you tend to get a little bit more, you not only get intensity in the fruits, but you also get, you tend to get ripeness at lower sugars, which is really important. So, you know, the wine that you're drinking now, the 2017, you know, that's probably barely 13% alcohol, and it still has this incredible freshness and high acidity. And I think a lot of that is because of dry farming.
Before I forget, I want to ask this one question because Eileen asked this. She'd like to know how these wines differ with regards to the effects of having a bit too much wine, because she never got a hangover in France. And should she only drink your wine or wine that espouses to be naturally produced. Can you weigh in on that? The effect?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, alcohol is alcohol. You know, if you drink a little too, you know, you kind of crush a couple of bottles this, you probably are going to wake up with a little bit of a headache. But, you know, it's still, you know, lower alcohol wines with no additives definitely are cleaner. But I think it's still, at the end of the day, if you're drinking a bunch of wine, doesn't matter if it's natural wine or not, and you're drinking a couple bottles, you're probably going to have a bit of you're going to feel a little hazy the next morning.
A little bit about your tannin threshold too. I mean, if you can't hang, you're going to feel like regardless.
I can't hang, but I have a high tannin threshold. I just have a low alcohol threshold, note to self. So not driving is a good thing. I want to remind everyone, by the way, that Carignan in Europe, you know, was a workhorse because of its yield in southern France, but also it has some nobility going on, especially in Priorat, right?
Yep.
Those of you who are hip to old vine, again, Carignan in northeastern Spain and Catalonia, blended with old vine Garnacha, and also in Sardinia. Where again, old vine, so Carignan has pockets of nobility that usually, so should we not plant and wait 50 years, but just look for old vine vineyards?
I don't know of anyone planting new vineyards of Carignan in California. That just does not exist, because you just know the time frame. And you know, so if you're planting any sort of Rhone varietals, you know, it's not Carignan. So, but nonetheless, I feel like we're incredibly lucky. We're in this beautiful period of time where these vineyards are thriving. I don't see them dying out anytime soon, and they're going to be around for at least another, you know, 40 to 60 years, I imagine.
What other wines are you making that we should pay attention to that may appear on your website? And what other areas are you sourcing from, Jason, in addition to Chardonnay and old vine Carignan? What should we look for?
Yeah, so, well, we make a Carignan rosé that's really beautiful, but outside of Mendocino, we make a little bit of Cabernet from an old vine vineyard in Carneros on the Sonoma side. That's
Cabernet
really,
Sauvignon from Carneros.
yeah,
Cool.
It's too. Huge fan. Have been a huge fan for a long time, by the way. Carried your today, carried your cab.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
So that's those are some wines to to kind of watch out for that I'm really excited about. And you know, I only make a couple barrels of those wines. What else? We have a Zin that's about to get released from Mendocino Ridge that was planted in 1878 that I'm really excited about. That's really pretty.
And from what great source? Where is it?
Mendocino Ridge.
The Mendocino. Oh, and I've got my friend Michelle. I was about to ask her what's available in Michigan. So Michelle, the Zinfandel is available in Michigan?
There's a little Zinfandel blend that's tasting great right now. I've used it on a couple of virtual wine dinners in the last month or so, and everybody has loved it. It was the star of one of the recent dinners. It's delicious.
So you can always annoy Mike when he comes back downstate and ask for the Zinfandel blend. He won't mind, because we can still get a little from AHD. But I tasted both Chardonnays, and I have to tell you, really my compliments. You know, this is a grape variety that people have expectations that are not always positive when they hit this grape variety. I just loved your thumbprint on these wines. You've left them alone, but they're, you know, recognizably Chardonnay. They're different, but in a way that, you know, doesn't pull up any red flags for me. And I just want to remind everybody, this whole natural subject, I don't know if we came to any conclusions, but, you know, you've heard, you know, the same melodies, both from Jason and from Dressner. You know, we're talking about as low intervention as possible. The word, you know, natural is not certified. Organic and biodynamic viticulture is, correct, Jason? But, you know, you look for organically farmed vineyards, some of which may have biodynamic practices as well. I always think of biodynamic as sort of uber organic, you know,
Yep.
You know, as little sulfur as possible, sometimes extended aging before bottling. But, you know, at the core of it all, and you said it at the very beginning, you know, farming with tremendous integrity. Is that a good statement?
Absolutely.
Hey, Madeline, and Jason, can I jump in? Just like a 2-minute quick question segment. So Jason, sulfites. So low sulfites, we have in the store, we have people who come in and they claim to have headaches from sulfites, and I explain to them that there's a small amount of the population that has even an allergy to sulfites.
It's real.
So it's real, but it's a small amount of people. So sulfites in natural wines, what do you think?
I think a little bit is really good. I mean, it's a stylistic decision, and you know, I think for me, I'm small enough as, you know, of a producer that I taste barrel to barrel and kind of always check in. And you know, I come across barrels all the time that are incredibly focused and pretty, and I know right away that there's no sulfur needed. And then once in a while there's barrels and I'm like, all right, you know, this might need a little bit more focus. You know, this is, you know, and always, you know, I've bottled some wine before that I've kept kind of as small projects, and they got mousy with no sulfur.
Like a bad mousy smell, correct?
Yeah, and for me, you know, I like clean, focused wines, and you know, that's for me is I have no problem with a little bit of sulfites. I think it's really important.
So So sorry to interrupt. So when a winemaker adds sulfites to wine, why do they sulfites are a natural product of fermentation. So why does a winemaker add sulfites to wine?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it definitely will stabilize the wine to a degree. You know, I've used a little bit of sulfur and still had spritz in a wine, but that's not a problem. I think thinking about, you know, if you have a wine, it depends, because if you are 100%, you know, if you're a natural winemaker and you want to go no sulfur, I think you tend to need to age in barrel that wine a little bit longer than normal, than rushing it to bottle really quickly and no sulfur, and then you start getting some secondary, you know, fermentations.
But isn't it fair to say that if people are eating any dried fruit, they're having a lot more SO2, a lot more than they are in any wine that's produced with integrity. Can I pivot, Mike, to, I know the next question you're going to ask is about cloudiness, right?
Well, there's some myths that you and I talked about. So like the Jason, the Vinca Minor wines seem to be more lifted. So there's a, you know, and I'll be honest, I read Alice Faring's book, and CO2 is higher because it protects against oxygen. So, you know, I get when a guest comes into my store, they're worried about funky natural wine. And all the wines we've tasted tonight are not quote unquote funky, but there are funky natural wines. So there are things that are not added or left out, or I guess I'm trying to get around what makes wine, a natural wine, funky, as opposed to what makes a natural wine more kind of mainstream.
Okay.
Or that doesn't smell what we would classically consider flawed.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just thinking more of like classic winemaking that's still rooted in kind of, it's still natural. It's racking clean prior to bottling, settling, using a little bit of sulfur, aging.
So you can actually you don't have to fine or filter to have a wine that's relatively clean. You know, you can just rack carefully, correct? And that's important for people to know. But if you see a little cloudiness, this is not a red flag, correct? We can accept it if it's from a producer of integrity.
Absolutely. And then, you know, I have some friends that are natural winemakers that really embrace some of the surprises
Yeah.
that kind of come along with bottling a wine that's maybe a little bit more cloudy than I would bottle it, and maybe not racking as carefully, and maybe that's really the style that they're kind of embracing.
I don't mind if they veer into weird, but they've probably got an audience for it too. We just had a question about cold stabilization. Do you cold stabilize? And what is cold stabilization? Can you define that for us?
Yeah, I don't cold stabilize. I'm not even set up if I wanted to in my cellar. I don't have any sort of glycol technology to cold stabilize a tank. But essentially, you know, you have a tank full of wine, a stainless steel tank that's pressurized. You hook it up to glycol, it chills it down just right around, 40 degrees, and any sediment, any haze, everything just drops and crystallizes to the bottom. And it's just another part of essentially fining.
So it's a bit too manipulative for you. You just don't opt to do it.
I've never worked with anyone that cold stabilized. I don't, my winery is very minimal, very basic. I don't have that sort of access. I don't think I would to begin with. I like a slight haze in a wine. So yeah.
I have to tell you that when in my the murky past of my career, when I was working at a wonderful restaurant called the London Chop House, and I was serving a producer that I'm sure you know of, Leroy, and I was looking at their bottle of Merceau, and there were floaties, and I thought, well, that's neat. And nobody had told me what they were, but they, didn't find, didn't filter, and racked with enthusiasm off the leaves. So cloudy is okay.
Yeah.
Any comments or questions before we liberate Jason from our company?
Yeah, Jason. So I'm curious, did you set out to make natural wine, or is it just what you just wanted to do? Because the way I see the market, natural wine has been made by winemakers for years, and nobody just categorized them as natural wine. And there's nothing on your website or your label that says natural wine. So I think that it's become a category, but there are a lot of winemakers who I talked to a lot of winemakers who said, that's always the way I've done it. So I'm curious if you set out to make a natural wine, or that's just the way you make wine.
Combination of both. I was working in Napa, and I get to see, I think firsthand, a lot of things right away that I knew maybe were wrong, that just didn't feel, kind of went against my instincts, just learning as far as picking decisions, things we're adding to the wine. And then also drinking quite a bit of natural wines and understanding the process that went into it. So it was a combination of knowing what really got me excited, and then also seeing at the same time wine that I knew that I just would not want to make myself. And then just kind of exploring more of the natural side. And, in 2013, there wasn't a whole lot of talk in California about natural wine. There were some old school guys like Tony Couturi that had been at it for decades.
This has happened literally overnight. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, even organic farming, the Fetzers debuted this in like the early 2000s, and it wasn't even hip at the time. There was no consumer demand for it. Does anyone want to pipe up about how the Carignan's tasting to them? Because I think it's arguably the most interesting wine we had tonight.
Can I make again about it? I think it's really cool. I mean, I think the freshness of the wine, the red fruit, there's a bouillon quality that I love that has that kind of dried, savory green herb quality. I've been a huge fan of this wine for a very, very long time. I think the interesting thing between this and the Dressner wine are just it's the total contrast. And I think that's one thing that shows both wines for what they are and really spotlights their characteristics in a way that is beautiful. But the Carignan, I mean, it's just such a cool wine.
I think it's old world meets new world in a glass. I swear to God, I really do. I meant what I said about the aromatics. It took me to Carignan in the Southern Rhone, and on the palate, mid palate, it's got this beautiful New World fruit, and then it just finishes this lovely cinch of almost ill-mannered tannin, but not quite. It just needs a lamb chop. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Ellen, real quick for Jason, and I know you got to go. Two things questions that arise: what are native yeast? And the question about minimal intervention. There are, as I understand it, 72 additives that are allowed to a wine.
Yep.
And that are allowed. So could you just explain for everybody what native yeast is, and then what kind of the basic 72 additives that are allowed in a wine that are not in natural wine?
Yeah, and so native yeast, every vineyard has its own little ecosystem, and if it's farmed healthy and it has living yeast on every single berry that's made up, and that's when you can start talking about terroir and bring in the grapes and let the native yeast on those grapes and in the vineyard really just take off and kick off fermentation. And I think that's always been really important. And as far as the 72 additives, I know there's a lot, and I don't know all of them, and I know a few of them, but I know that's, there's so much technology out there that you can really just kind of shape a wine. When you bring in the juice, you kill all the native yeast with sulfur, you inoculate with your own synthetic yeast that will kind of control mouthfeel. You can buy a strain of yeast from Burgundy and make your Chardonnay taste exactly like your favorites, your favorite vineyard, if you want to, if you get down to that detail. And then there's all sorts of, agents and powders that will create a certain mouthfeel and texture and color that can be used together. And I mean, that happens on a pretty large scale. That's, you see a few tricks in Napa and Sonoma, mostly outside of the native yeast realm and kind of wanting to control and keep consistency. But, once you start you start making like 100,000 cases, couple 100,000 cases, some of those additives come into play. I don't know how many, but I've never worked for a winery that size. So I'm probably a little naive, but I know they're out there. And so,
you know what, Jason, you stay naive. Your wines are beautiful. They really are. And they express your spirit and your heart. And we're going to look forward to supporting you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Forward. And we have to thank Mike Francisco. I don't know what happened to him, but that's okay. He can listen to this because we did record it. And please accept a hug from your home turf in Michigan for spending so much enthusiastic, expressive time with us.
Thank you.
And we had a hell of a chat room going on, actually. It did veer into lamb kofta because I think that Carignan was making everyone think of, gee, what would be fun? And I think people were serving platters of stuff, but we wish you and Emily, and your little girl's name again? Ava, all the best. And,
thank you.
Please know that you have friends and fans in Michigan.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone, for exploring this topic with us. We hung out for quite a while. And you know what? Very few people dropped off. I'm impressed. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes. Mike, thank you for bringing it back to questions that need to be asked for clarification. And we're giving Marshall Ware big points for answering all the technical questions in the chat room, because when Marshall's on, we don't have to worry about it, right?
I do have a quick question. I don't know if anybody else has had this observation, but I've noticed because the wide range of spectrum of the profile of natural wine, like I joke around with Mikey about the apple cider vinegar spectrum, right on the far end of the very natural, untouched, to the
sour beer,
right.
Yeah.
So you have the Macon-Charnay, you have the Brea wines that are gorgeous, which Michelle is, I'm sure, familiar with. Love them so much.
Brea, if you guys want to
Brea.
look for those. Brea.
So good. Every single one of those wines, I was shocked to find out they were natural wines.
And they're from California, correct, Michelle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rock cellars, yeah,
Yep.
rock cellars.
So surprising. So I'm wondering if a closure has anything to do with it, and or if the closure is just some type of weird side effect of the type of wine that people are making. So I've noticed that the more apple cider vinegary, pet nat, like really rough version of natural wine has had a lot of bottle cap closure. And
Orange wine, weird
Right.
orange wine.
weird orange
Right.
wine. I mean, people are making this style and not necessarily trying to intentionally oxidize or intentionally oxidizing, unsure, but you have this bottle cap closure. And then most of the wines I've come in contact with that have more elegance and are more structured and are more traditional in style have definitely had that cork closure. So I'm wondering if that's a factor, if it's a byproduct. I really don't know exactly how.
Oh, Mikey is raising his hand.
Trying to answer the question from Alice Ferring's book. A longer
Wait a minute,
fermentation.
with Alice, and it's Feiring. I'm going to put it in the chat room because she wrote the book on natural wine, correct?
She wrote a yes.
Go ahead, Mike. I'm going to write this in the chat.
Several books on natural wine.
Yes. So my understanding is that apples and pears and cider ferment longer, and they give you that quality. And natural wine, some natural wines ferment longer in process, and they give, if they ferment too long or they're not controlled, they will give you the apple cider kind of quality.
Mhm.
And I try to tell people in the store, I try not to bring in natural wines that have that quality, but I do bring in some just to kind of give it out.
Some people have that palate.
And
It's okay.
if you like, I try to explain to people, and if Phil's still on the call, he can chime in. If you like a sour beer, you might like natural wine. And it's just the fermentation process that the wine goes through. So the longer the fermentation, the more bruised apple and apple cider characteristics you're going to get. And that's just kind of if you will, a natural product of natural wine.
Will that be on the sign? Will you put that in the sign that you write so when people read them, they will understand that?
No, I just put funky. And they get that.
Highly technical term.
But when I talk to people about natural wine, there are certain natural wines, and most of them I carry, Vinca Minor, Brea, for instance. Like Brea, you would never know is a natural wine. And
So
Brea comes from Brock cellars. But there are some wines that are funky, and they're just purposely made funky in a apple cidery kind of way, in a way that that certain sour beer people will really like them. And it's a taste preference, and it just has to do with the fermentation that goes into.
And it's intentional. So that's what you're saying. But it requires clarification.
It's intentional, yes.
But to go back to my original question, is the closure a byproduct, or is it something that is?
We have to research this, Carrie.
I just want to know.
I don't know.
I mean, because so I went to Chicago to visit her, and I brought back 6 bottles of wine, a few of which had the bottle cap closure, and I know for a fact they're going to taste like apple cider vinegar, and I'm going to be okay with it, but it's not my favorite style of natural wine.
No, but this is something that we will scratch around and answer, because that's a decision that wineries are making. I have to show this, and I utterly forgot until before people started dropping off. Michelle and I are hosting a Chateauneuf du party next week.
Yes.
With 1 white and 3 red Chateauneuf du Papes.
Yep.
And it is October 29th at 6:30 p.m. Same time, same station. Here, I will tell you, these are, they're premium if you look at the price points, but they're well worth it. And we did a special 3-pack of the reds with a discount and 4-pack with the whites with the discount, because we had to include our friend and Charlotte Melia, who makes fondue. And white Chateauneuf is so rare. If you go online and you read this cunning little effusive description, Michelle wrote it. I do not get the credit for this, but we're definitely mixing it up with some cool old world wines. Anything you want to say about the CDP tasting, Mish?
Michael's going to join us for this one, I think, because he's very well versed in the soil types of Châteauneuf du Pape.
Wonderful.
And I'm really excited about this tasting. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Mike, did you cover everything you wanted to cover?
I think so. I think that, you know, I think that people need to try what I consider mainstream natural wine. And I think that, you know, within a year, there will not be a natural wine section, you know.
Oh, I don't know about that. Oh, we're going to meet back in a year here.
But there are many producers that make natural wine. Laurence Farad makes a natural Châteauneuf du Pape and Côte d'Aron. And nobody knows about it because it's not advertised. And there are many producers who they just make the wine that way, and it's just the way they make it. And some of it is marketing, some of it is intentional.
She doesn't need, when you have a producer that good, she doesn't need to be under a natural wine end cap.
No,
she's famous for making great CDP.
But I think people would be surprised she doesn't put additives in her wine, and
Michelle,
it makes
you were
it.
gonna say something.
I was going to say, don't you think the whole fascination and conversation about natural wine is an extension of everybody's interest in everything food and restaurant and chef and where things are coming from these days? We pay way more attention to where our food comes from and how it's farmed and how it's packaged and how it gets to us. And I think that the conversation about natural wine is the same thing. The farmers have been making wine and winemakers for years this way. They just haven't talked about it so much.
No, I completely agree. And I think there are many Rhone producers who are natural. There are many Sancerre producers who are natural. There are many French and Italian producers who are natural who never market it as natural. And I that's why I say, I think, you know, within a short term, the term natural wine will just kind of fade away. And, you know, I've talked to many producers who said, that's just the way I've always made it. And I never put additives in it. That's just what I did. You know, but I think people need to get beyond the natural wine.
But you know what it's doing too? I'm going to chime in here on one thing. All of us in the wine business are concerned about getting a younger demographic. We need all generations drinking wine. And if this is a subject that pulls young people in and who are fiercely interested in this word and in this subject, I'm in, you know, because how to expand our, you know, how to share with people who are younger than we are, you know, how to pull them in to, you know, if this subject is that rope that pulls them into it, I will dance this dance, you know, and that's why I'm personally fiercely interested in educating myself. Alice's book is on my, you can share it with me, but I tend to highlight things, so I should buy my own. I mean, I spent all afternoon reading about sustainable farming, biodynamic, organic, certifiable, not certifiable, you know, everything related to the subject. But I know that it is on a vertical climb in terms of young people paying attention to it. And also, I mean, there are conventions, natural wine conventions.
Well, you can go, if you go to Paris, there are natural wine bars all over the place.
Right.
If you go to New York, there are natural wine bars. If you go to Chicago, there are natural wine bars.
Yeah, we're starting them.
If you go to downtown Detroit, there are Psalms that just like natural wine. Whether that's a thing or not, it's a thing. And I think we have to get over the natural wine geeky, you know, weird concept and move on to they're just made naturally. And for us at Plum Market, it kind of plays in, you know, it works with the concept of Plum Market. And I just think there's so much great wine made that just happens to be naturally made that people don't understand. It's just there. And when you look deeper into how winemakers make wine, and they make it naturally, they don't put additives in it, it's nothing to them, it's something to us, and eventually it's going to be nothing to us. We just move on.
Well, and we will have at that point recognized, maybe we will transcend the word and recognize producers that are simply worth paying attention to.
And Dressner's a great example of, you know, if you take a look at Dressner versus Jenny and Francois, two completely different worlds. But Dressner they make Kermit Lynch has many producers who are natural.
Well, they started their Beaujolais producers started the official natural wine movement in France. I'm going to close this up.
Yep.
I'm going to thank everyone for participating. This was truly one of the more interactive tastings we've had. Mike, you were a rock star. Thank you. Carrie, poetic as always. Michelle, thanks for hanging. Marshall, you got to come every week so I don't have to answer any damn technical questions. Bobby, always nice to have your input. We've got Jorge lurking in the background.
Yes! Where's Jorge?
Always lurking.
Jorge?
You're always lurking.
Whatever anybody is eating, Jorge has cooked something better, right?
Where's your To Catch a Predator look? Come on, I want to see it. I want to see it.
Fritz and Kareem, thank you for being on. Nathan, Judith, Phil, thank you for joining us. The first time, yay. Sherry, James, everyone. Eileen, thank you for your terrific comment. Hope to see you next week with CDP. You know, Michelle and I will be on with Bells. This was a cool conversation. Big props and kudos to Mike. Thank you. Take good care, everyone. Have a wonderful, perfect Michigan weekend. Even if it's cold, it's going to be sunshiny and beautiful.
Cold and rainy and thunderstorming right now, but it's great.
Oh, you know, it's Michigan.
Night, Madeline.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
There's Jorge.
Oh, wait.
There's Jorge. Hey, listen, Northern Michigan, come back with some more comments, and I gotta send Jason some wine. I can send him something from Left Foot directly and expense it. If you're inspired and you send something, I'll make sure the cost is covered. But just tell me. You want me just to go and send him something from Left Foot, like that luthier?
Yes, but I mean, I think the stuff that's going to be the most interesting is what he's actually pulling right now. So it's going to be difficult. This vintage, I think, is going to be a game changer for them. I think the way that he is harvesting, I think his processes, I think a good majority of what's happening now is going to be more important. So I would almost wait. I would wait.
Well, I gotta send Jason something.
I would send him some Mauby.
No. So we need to send him.
Send me a text or tell me what to send him.
I'll send you a text.
We're gonna send
me
you
a text.
We're gonna send you a list because we have definitely.
No, we got to send him something because my very bad. Dave, thank you for being on. You are the most faithful wine bar attendee. I'm always happy to see you. You are. Have a good night, everyone. I have to go eat something. Bye.